On my business card, I am a corporate president. In my mind, I am a game developer. But in my heart, I am a gamer. Today, I'd like to speak to you from my heart about our jobs and about our industry.
I can still remember the first time I ever played Super Smash Bros. Melee. I was 6 years old, and I picked Link because he was my favorite Nintendo character. I remember spamming Link's up B on the Pokemon Stadium rock transformation, and hearing other members of my family complain about how stupid the annoying mountain was. Even now, I can still remember how much I immediately loved the game, and 20 years after that day, I and many others are still here. Still spamming slightly more sophisticated versions of Link's up B, still getting into arguments about how stupid the mountain is. Between then and now, we've dumped a collective hundreds of thousands of hours into the game, learning every tiny detail about it we could find, creating our own highly specialized training tools, redefining how the game could be played altogether. By all accounts, our community should be a shining example of the potential for innovation when passionate people gather and work on something that they love. But for some reason, it's not. The story of our community is, instead, the story of repeatedly stifled progress. It's a story full of amazing people doing amazing things, and having those things forcibly ripped out of our hands again and again, only for us to somehow come back stronger each time. Back in 2001, video games did not have all that fancy ranked online stuff. If you wanted to play other people, you had to go over to your friend's house to play. When competitive Melee blossomed into its own underground community, players would have to physically travel to events and play on the same consoles. Of course, this isn't exactly compatible with the worldwide lockdown that we had in early 2020, which more or less brought the competitive scene to a screeching halt. With no venues to run tournaments out of, the Smash community was largely relegated to playing online through emulators with delay-based netcode, which left a lot to be desired. It was impossible to play anyone more than a few miles away without substantial lag, and people were left to wonder, is this it for our scene? Is our game just dead until COVID is defeated? On a quiet Monday in June, a software developer called Fizzy36 posted a tweet about a project he was releasing. It was a new set of features for his fork of the Dolphin emulator called Slippi. It had 3 important features: replays, matchmaking, and something called rollback netcode, all open source and free to download. It's hard to explain just how monumentally important this single day was to the scene. In the middle of a pandemic, in a year where people questioned whether Melee could even survive, there was finally a glimmer of hope. Melee was this decades-old game with no developer support and no in-game online play, and overnight we now had better online play than Street Fighter, Tekken, and Smash Ultimate. Melee was given new life. Weekly online tournaments frequently drew hundreds of entrants. High-level players fought in high-profile events like Slippi Champions League. The Big House announced it would hold an online event. It almost felt like old times. We were thriving in a way that even developer-supported games weren't. But perhaps, in some ways, we were flying too close to the sun. Just a few weeks after announcing the tournament, the Big House announced that it had canceled its online event. The reason? Nintendo had sent a cease and desist letter to the series, claiming that Slippi is an unauthorized mod requiring illegal copies of the game. Briefly putting aside the legal gray area regarding whether or not emulators are against the law, the maddening part about this is that Melee is an out-of-production game. It is no longer possible to purchase Melee directly from Nintendo, as it has never been remade, nor has it appeared on any virtual console. It was a senseless power play amidst a global pandemic to protect Nintendo's intellectual property. if you want to play Melee, you need to meet in person and risk dying. So what did the Smash community do in response? They did what gamers do best: complain incessantly. In the weeks following, hashtags like Free Melee and Save Smash immediately skyrocketed to the top worldwide trending topics on Twitter. Numerous online events were held, many reaching hundreds of entrants. Held on the same day as when the Big House was cancelled, Smash Summit 10 drew over 50,000 viewers, the most Melee had seen for any tournament since before the pandemic. Other communities even joined in to show solidarity. Top Splatoon players entered a Nintendo-sponsored tournament with team names referencing Free Melee. When Nintendo cut the stream for the top 4 matches in retaliation, all 4 teams immediately dropped out of the event. In under 24 hours, the Splatoon community threw together a tournament with the largest prize pool in their game's history and played out the finals there instead. They called it the Squid House. Now, did any of this complaining spur Nintendo to do anything? No, not really. Getting mad for a few weeks was pretty fun though. To be fair, some Nintendo fans pointed out that the Big House was directly partnered with Nintendo. According to them, a Nintendo sponsorship meant explicit endorsement of the tournament. It wasn't personal, it was just that Nintendo simply could not allow an emulator-run event as something that they were sponsoring. I'm sure if you ran an event in which you did this sort of thing free from Nintendo's involvement, while playing on official Nintendo hardware using a purchased copy of the game, then everything would have gone just fine. That makes sense, right? Right?
Well, good morning, Whit. Right now, 3 in 10 hospitals nationwide say their ICUs are at least 80% full.
Meeting American communities as the viral spread speeds faster. The U.S. already logging 1 million new cases in the first 5 days of December.
Multiple provinces are facing a major resurgence of COVID-19. There are questions about how we even got here.
500,071 dead. That's more Americans who have died in 1 year in this pandemic than in World War I, World War II, and the Vietnam War combined.
It's August 2021. We have been locked in our homes for months. We are losing our minds. But things are a little different now. We have a few vaccines to fight COVID. We know Nintendo sponsorships are a death knell for our events. For the first time in months, venues are cautiously allowing us to book events with strict entrance caps. Summit recently held an invitational tournament for the first time in a year, and it was awesome. The first major tournament since the lockdown is announced: Riptide, a water park event to be held in September. It's not sponsored by Nintendo. It's got a vaccine mandate. Everybody is on the edge of their seats, excited to see each other again. But perhaps no community was more thrilled for the return of their game on the big stage than the long-lost sibling of the Melee scene, Project Plus. You might know it as Project M, a mod of Super Smash Bros. Brawl that made the game play more like Melee. Back in 2014, Project M was arguably the most popular Smash game altogether. There was a time where you couldn't enter a college dorm room without seeing a group of people playing PM. And it was a mainstay at virtually every major Smash tournament. Every top 8 was an eclectic mix of notable Melee, Brawl, and dedicated solo PM players. The game was everywhere, and everyone was playing it at every level of the game. Project M was the biggest love letter to Smash ever created, an unstoppable force that brought everyone together. And yet, just a year after the height of its popularity, the development team would disband forever. And it felt like the game just vanished overnight, at the very apex of the esports bubble. Players from Melee were getting signed to Cloud9, Evil Geniuses, and Team Liquid. But the team behind this beloved Brawl mod just disappeared. The game was unceremoniously dropped from virtually every major tournament series, and popular Smash channels either deleted or stopped uploading sets from Project M events altogether. You could probably guess why. Legal pressure from Nintendo, legal pressure from Nintendo, and legal pressure from Nintendo, respectively. To make matters worse, this was a time during which the Melee community truly held its last shred of hope that Smash could become a Tier 1 esport. Local Smash scenes often followed the lead of major TOs, refusing to run PM out of fear that their event would be shut down, even if the PM community offered to do all the work for them. At one point, representatives from Twitch itself were telling Smash TOs outright that streaming Project M was not going to be allowed, that it would be a game banned from their platform altogether. That's gotta be game over, right? Project M can't possibly come back from this. Their game is certain to die now. But somehow, it didn't. Instead of giving up, Project M just moved on, doing everything it could to survive on its own. And by all measures, it succeeded. Today, 2015 to 2018 marks the prime of Project M, with 2018 boasting its largest tournament ever. It has its own annual rankings, it has a dedicated player base, and it got the Project Plus update in 2020. It's a community that's vibrant, thriving, and operating completely independently, a truly grassroots, underground scene which is persevering through tough times. Sounds familiar, right? Here we are, back in 2021. Project Plus doesn't have rollback netcode. It doesn't have top players signed to big organizations. Hell, they have a worse relationship with Nintendo than the Melee community does. But with Riptide boasting its own Project Plus bracket, everything was set in place for their scene's hard work over the last 7 years to have finally paid off. Project M was not dead. It was more alive now than maybe ever. On August 27th, Riptide posted an update. The Project Plus tournament would be cancelled in the wake of a conversation with a Nintendo representative. 2 weeks later, Nintendo did the same thing to another tournament. In other words, that whole Nintendo sponsorship thing didn't really mean anything. Nintendo can just crush the hopes of their most dedicated fans whenever they want. Per usual, you might think that this is it for P+, that there's just no way that this scene could survive. But as of late, the current strategy seems to be running shadow tournaments, secret events operating out of hotel rooms at majors, with no official relationship to the larger event. At Riptide, they called this tournament Undertow, and for what it's worth, it pulled 193 entrants, despite signups being entirely underground. The one at Low Tide City pulled a $3,000 pop bonus, and through additional community donations, catapulted into being one of the highest prize pool of any Project M event in history. It's all but assured that P+ will have some presence at Main Stage as well, our project tentatively titled Jailbreak. Make no mistake, this will keep happening forever. Because of Nintendo, P+ will never be a Tier 1 esport. It will never have the same kind of visibility or opportunities as any of the other Smash scenes. At the same time, all the money that Nintendo could possibly scrounge together would never be enough to stop these people from doing what they love. If you go to a Smash Super Major, there is always going to be Smashers playing PM, even if it's not directly in the venue. I know what you're thinking. If you're Nintendo, I guess it's reasonable enough that you would have a problem with a mod of your game. I'm sure if you played by their rules, if you only enjoyed official Nintendo IP on official Nintendo platforms, of course then there'd be no problem, right? Right? Let's dial it back 8 years to 2013. It was a different time. People could go outside or stand within 6 feet of each other without recoiling in fear. And while 6,000 people crammed together in a hotel ballroom may now sound like something you'd want to avoid, in 2013, it was a sign of progress for a small community of nerds celebrating a new chapter in their lives. This is EVO 2013, the premier fighting game championship series in the world. Mango is about to win the tournament over Wobbles, after winning 7 intense matches from the losers bracket. It was a legitimizing moment for the Super Smash Bros. Community, one that proved that this decade-old game was so good that it could still be exciting to watch today. But this tournament set almost never happened. Earlier in the same year, EVO had already announced its main stage games. Among them are the latest editions of the fighting game classics, Street Fighter, Marvel vs. Capcom, Tekken. But EVO had a single open slot for yet another tournament. Whichever gaming community could raise the most money in a month-long donation drive benefiting breast cancer research would win a final ticket to EVO's main stage. It was around the same time that a group of Melee TOs, commentators, and dedicated fans had already started their own podcast called Melee It On Me. They realized that this could be their chance to bring their game back to the limelight. As a result, Melee It On Me started a massive digital campaign to include Melee at EVO. Or at least, they tried to.
Hold on to that feeling.
Wow. Oh, tried, Bobby.
It was pretty good.
It's not well coordinated, it's not calculated, it's not polished at all. These streams are just a bunch of friends on a Skype call, spending their free time talking with each other about how sick their game is. Although many of them would go on to become household names of the scene, right now, they're just a bunch of dorks. And they're brought together by a video game. Somehow, they raise $94,000 in donations from other dorks. In the age of Summit prize pools and tournaments streaming to hundreds of thousands of fans, this might not seem so radical. But 2013 was a different community. The biggest tournament of all time at that point had a little under 350 entrants, and none of the top players were anything but a blip on the larger esports radar. And yet, despite this, they were able to make it happen. It wasn't by the grace of any company, it was just from people like Nova, an Australian smasher whose $20,000 donation pushed Melee over the finish line. After years of relative obscurity, it was the break that the community had finally been looking for. Nintendo had other ideas. Although Melee had been featured at EVO in the past, in the years since, EVO had grown. It had grown into a bona fide esports event, one that drew thousands of entrants and attention from the entire gaming sphere, and one that Nintendo made no money from. The week of the tournament, Nintendo abruptly decided that they were not okay with their game being predominantly featured at an event without their involvement. They demanded the shutdown of the stream, and as it were later revealed, the entire tournament altogether. In a lot of ways, the Melee community was pretty lucky that the money that they raised was for charity. After some truly awful press, Nintendo graciously allowed EVO to use their intellectual property. Let's zoom out a little bit. Nintendo has squashed attempts to play their game amidst a global pandemic. Nintendo has repeatedly squashed attempts to play the ultimate love letter to one of their most popular franchises. Nintendo has attempted to squash a bunch of teenagers raising almost 6 figures for charity in the name of their game franchise. Man, if you didn't know any better, you might even get the impression that they don't like us. Maybe you still think Nintendo's acting reasonably. You wouldn't be wrong to say that the competitive nature of Smash tournaments often contradicts Nintendo's family-friendly and casual-appearing branding. Perhaps to you, it's well within Nintendo's rights to restrict the growth of a scene that could in any way damage the Disneyland-esque image they have constructed of themselves. But if you look really closely, you'll find that Smashers are far from alone in being punished for participating in communities around Nintendo games. As it turns out, the moment you cross into the world of creating something other people like, Nintendo will be there, quick to remind you that whatever you decide to make belongs to them. Today is August 6th, 2016. 30 years ago today, Metroid was released on the Nintendo Entertainment System. It is the favorite game franchise of an Argentinian programmer, and it shows. For the last 5 years, Milton has been tirelessly working on a PC remake of Metroid 2. And today is finally the day that his 5 years of labor will finally bear fruit. The release date of AM2R. Fans of other games have probably heard this type of story before. Half-Life fans creating Counter-Strike as a modded game mode. Defense of the Ancients, a mod of Warcraft 3, spiraling out to become one of the biggest esports on Earth. You might even remember Sonic Mania, a story eerily similar to AM2R. A team of prominent ROM hackers who developed beautiful from-scratch remakes of the old classics, acquired by Sega to produce a sick 2D Sonic game for the franchise's 25th anniversary. Like Sonic Mania, AM2R absolutely kicks ass, catapulting an old classic into the modern era with additional features, controls, even new areas and bosses. However, unlike Sonic Mania, AM2R is a tribute to a Nintendo game. And while many gaming companies keep an eye out for this sort of talented fan projects as a means of scoping out passionate and hireable talent, Nintendo has no such playbook. Less than 24 hours after the release date of AM2R, Nintendo issued cease and desist letters to every website hosting a copy of AM2R. 5 years of work on a free-to-play fan game dedicated to Milton's favorite franchise, wiped out in a single day. A year later, Nintendo released a game titled Metroid Samus Returns, which was, you guessed it, a remake of Metroid 2. At some point during the development cycle of AM2R, Nintendo likely hit upon the same idea, and after Milton beat them to the punch, felt the game's existence would eat into the profits of their officially licensed title. Believe it or not, Milton somehow emerged from this with no bitterness at all. He enjoyed Nintendo's take on the same idea, and he was just happy people love what he made. But even just with a single day, there were people who grew to love what Milton created. And it is very, very hard to take away something that people love. Fairly quickly, a project went underway to slowly recreate equivalent code from the dumped bytecode of the released binary. Community members started developing the game collectively in secret, passing builds along to each other via torrent and file sharing websites. Over time, the community around this game added new content, like a randomizer mode, New Game Plus, Linux support, new art, new music, and more. AM2R, for all intents and purposes, is a game which ceased to exist. It's a game which was not truly owned by its creator, a game which lived and died overnight. But killing a game with a community full of people that love it is a lot harder than it sounds, and certainly a lot harder than tearing down a download link on a few websites. The world has so many brilliant, talented people who are together capable of incredible things when all of their emotions point in the same direction. It's not unlike our own community, just a scary letter from a corporate legal team, and all of the talent that we can scrape together in an attempt to persevere through it anyways. It's tempting, maybe even comforting, to see the Smash community as this super grassroots thing that operates independently from everything else, as this thing that we collectively built out of thin air. But if the last decade is anything to show for, the reality is a bit harsher. Smash has seen enormous success, in spite of Nintendo's active efforts to kill the scene. We as a community exist in the real world, and in the real world, there is no such thing as existing independently from everyone else. Everything is monetized, and commercialization touches everything in every part of modern life. Everything from the dirt you stand on to the pattern of ink printed on your shirt is owned by somebody. It doesn't matter how you feel about it or how hard you work on it. Just the fact that you pretend for a moment that it's yours is enough for you to face legal consequences. The reality is that, like Disney, Nintendo is a company which owns branded characters and wields legal might to protect any and all ownership over these characters. And Smash, a game which brings all of their intellectual property together in one spot, is an amalgamation of all the things that people love about Nintendo. With 2 separate games capable of drawing in tournaments of over 1,000 entrants and over 100,000 viewers, the Smash brand is one of the strongest in all of esports, one that can attract both casual and die-hard fans in equal measures. Any company would kill for what we have, and in a way, we'd kill to have any other company. It's a bit of a catch-22. Smash's esports success is intrinsically linked to Nintendo's characters and IP, but the success is squashed by the very same company. There are many, many projects in the gaming sphere whose success has been compromised through legal pressure from Nintendo, each with its own story of underappreciated labor being vaporized from existence. The list is long and bleak. A constant reminder that no matter how hard you work on these projects, no matter how much love you put into them, they'll never belong to you. And yet, within the small communities surrounding these broken projects, owning the intellectual property was never really the point to begin with. For most of us, it was never really about making a profit or a career out of the game. It was about sharing joy with other people, doing great things together, and using our hobbies to make a difference. The Smash community will never have the backing of a corporate giant like Nintendo. nor would we really ever want it. What we have instead is something more powerful, something which can't be taken away. History. The steady rhythm of a community consistently doing incredible things and asking for virtually nothing in return. The beating heart of something truly alive, a living organism with thousands of hands. It's a story of us persevering against the odds, the story of a scene that has actively stared down Goliath for over a decade and lived to tell the tale. Despite a painful awareness that our labor doesn't belong to us, despite legal and financial barriers, despite the real world often getting in the way of the world that we made for ourselves, we have kept our own love and passion aflame for no other reason than because we want to. Nintendo may have created the game, but together, we created what we have right now. From the block of marble, we carved out our own rules, our own resources, our own history. In a way, our own game.